welcome to this Instagram page. So this page has been designed to share my research that focused on Charli XCX and her album How I'm Feeling Now. So the research kind of explored fandom, perceptions and experiences of the album, and I'll go into the album a bit more and talk about how I conducted this research, and I'll also explore the findings that were found and talk about kind of how they may influence the music industry and what it kind of means for fandom. So firstly, I'll talk about the research question. So the question was, how did the Charli XCX fandom perceive and experience their participation in the digitally collaborative construction of How I'm Feeling Now? So let's unpick that a little bit. So the term fandom is one used to describe the subculture of fans. So this talks about kind of how fans collect together as they have like shared experiences and they're very like-minded and have a shared focus on a particular, say, band, artist, brand, sports team and things like that. So this specific question focuses on the Charli XCX fandom. So that is the group of fans that gather around Charli that have the shared love for the artist Charli XCX. And then the digitally collaborative construction of the album refers to kind of the nature of this album. So Charli announced that she was going to be doing a quarantine album at the beginning of lockdown via a Zoom call. The first 1,000 fans could join this Zoom call. And when she shared this information, she spoke about how she wanted this album to be the most collaborative yet. So Charli XCX is quite well known for collaborating with up-and-coming artists and underground musicians on many of her kind of, you could say, mainstream albums. However, this announcement opened this collaboration up to fans. So Charli XCX wanted to focus on including fans' artwork, fan lyric suggestions, fan video clips and various other forms of involvement. So that's why this question focuses on that album, because it's quite a new way of doing things. It hasn't really been done before, especially to the extent that Charli XCX planned and decided to do this. I haven't seen any, whilst researching any other artist that has collaborated with their fans to this level. So I found that quite interesting. And the context of it as well is another interesting part of it, because the album was created during a time that many felt isolated, many were on their own, staying in their home or couldn't see friends or family other than digitally. So it was a very interesting way of not only commenting on that time period, but also getting fans to be involved with something. And Charli herself said that she wanted to kind of use this time to create, and she wanted to encourage the creativity of her fans as well. So that's a bit about the album and a bit about fandom. So now I'm going to explore how and why I conducted this research. So the research was conducted via interviews. I spoke to 6 members of the Charli XCX fandom and asked them various questions about how they experienced this album, their levels of involvement and what it meant to them. And the reason I wanted to do this research, I guess I've explored a bit talking about kind of the nature of it, but it was, to me, a revolutionary way of involving fans, especially in a time where the music industry, due to the pandemic, was kind of a grey area to some extent. So artists didn't know when they were touring again, fans didn't know when they'd be able to see their artists again, music couldn't be made in studios, there couldn't be collaboration through real life collaboration, and it was a very questionable time, so nobody knew what was going to happen, and that wasn't just in the music industry, that was across the board with most things. So the way that Charli presented this album was very exciting, very fresh, and it also to some extent kind of redefined the notion of like fan involvement, and also the notion of live. So a lot of the process of this was documented via Zoom. So Charli announced that she would do weekly Zoom calls to kind of share her experience, how she was feeling, what the next steps were, how far she'd come with the album. She also spoke to various fans in the Zoom calls, and they asked questions about what the album was going to look like, what she was going to include and things like that. She also used this as an opportunity to speak to other artists or celebrities and kind of get their opinion, ask them how they're feeling, how they're doing during lockdown. And it was kind of a very open method of communication. And another example of the liveness that I've kind of alluded to is the Instagram lives that Charli XCX done. So throughout the process, throughout the lockdown, she'd have various Instagram lives, including ones where she'd do yoga with another artist, she'd do songwriting sessions, she'd do art sessions, and she'd talk about well-being and health during this period. So again, another way for fans to kind of interact. With the song lyric ones, she actually was open to suggestions for certain songs. So I believe one fan told me that they were involved for the writing of Forever. They commented on the Instagram live, and then Charli used their lyric that they commented. So that's kind of another way that she broke that barrier of live. And so the reason that I wanted to explore that further is because I felt that this collaborative kind of method of creating an album and this live sharing of the whole process was almost a direct response to the lockdown stopping live performance. So Charli kind of found a way to still have that level of interaction with fans, still have some sort of live performance, whether it be sharing the Zoom call, sharing her progress, or doing song lyric writing sessions. So I thought that was very, very interesting, and I wanted to unpick it further, and I wanted to see what the fans thought. I wanted to see how these methods and how these experiences impacted them as fans and what it meant to them. So that is a little bit about how and why I conducted the research. So now I'm going to talk more about the themes that were uncovered through the interviews. I did, for the analysis of these interviews, I kind of explored the transcript. So I wrote all the kind of comments and everything that was said during the interviews. I went through them and I chose the key themes that kind of came up across the interviews, or maybe there were some differences, but yeah, so those will be explored in the themes. So the first theme is the Charli XCX brand, how I'm feeling now experience. So let me explain that a little bit further. So the idea of a celebrity being a brand is something that I found in previous literature. So this is almost the idea that fans are both fans and consumers. So they involve with kind of consumer-like behaviour. They buy into the artist, they collect memorabilia, they listen to the music, and this was kind of explored through a brand-consumer relationship. But the next level up from that is the idea that there are brand experiences. So previous research gives the example of Lady Gaga's live shows. So Lady Gaga's live shows are always a spectacle. There's kind of different layers to it. She isn't just standing at the front singing. They've got special effects, dancers, a huge stage, huge props, and it's a whole experience. So through exploring that, I coined this album construction and experience that was part of the Charli XCX brand. So many of the interviewees commented on that, and they kind of shared how they got involved in this brand experience and what it meant to them. So a lot of the fans, all of them were positive, all of them had a great experience of this album, but a lot of them spoke about how they found it really, really interesting that Charli had shared her whole process. They'd never seen kind of the behind the scenes of an artist to that extent before. So their experience of that arguably meant that they felt closer and more connected to Charli. And that was kind of a running theme throughout, was that level of connectedness. So that was part of the brand experience. Another theme of it was collaboration and participation. So all of the fans that I interviewed had different levels of participation. So 3 of the fans were involved with the Zoom calls. So they managed to get on the Zoom call as one of the fans that was asking questions. So yeah, they said that was like, it was like meeting Charli. A few of them had met Charli before, and they said that interaction, being able to ask Charli a question, was kind of at the same level as meeting her. And also further collaboration was through the aforementioned lyric sessions. So one of the fans, like I said before, had a lyric chosen for Forever. Another fan had suggested that Charli put Party For You on the album, and then was over the moon that actually did make the album. And also another theme was the perceived genuine and personal relationships with fans that Charli has. So many of the fans comment on how vulnerable Charli was during this process. She shared videos of her crying, she shared her moods, and she was very open about the whole process. And previous research explored that this level of vulnerability and intimacy means that fan and artist relationships can be stronger, and they're felt by the fans as more reciprocal. So this was echoed in the interviews, definitely. Like, a lot of the fans felt that they were reciprocated, they were listened to, and they were heard. And that was not only because of the notion of the album, how it was focused on participation, but also the constant Zooms, the constant updates, and that level of intimacy and closeness that Charli managed to maintain throughout the process. And then another theme is emotional attachment and identity. So again, similarly to the close personal relationships, this intimacy is felt by fans, and they kind of develop an emotional attachment to their artist, to their brand. And this is something that kind of encourages loyal fans, it encourages participation, and also it develops a sense of identity. So a lot of the fans that I spoke to told me about their almost like their childhood and how they've grown up through music consumption. They've developed themselves through following Charli, and they almost express themselves through music. And their involvement with Charli and their involvement with this album has a deeper effect than just joy of the music and joy of participation. Some of the fans that I spoke to wanted to take things further with music. 2 of them were studying music-related courses. One of them shared that he really would love to work for Charli's team. And I found that very interesting because some of the research says that fandom and fans were silly, or that it was kind of pathological or a bit weird that they had such a strong following. But this involvement also had a very personal aspect. Fans wanted to use their love for this music and their passion for music and use it as a career, use it as self-development, and they identify with it. So that was another very interesting theme that was covered in the research. And another